The winter wind cut through Ogden, Utah like a knife through canvas, and Roswell Xavier had seen enough harsh winters in these mountains to know that this one in 1878 would claim lives before spring arrived. He guided his massive bay gelding down the main street, his broad shoulders hunched against the bitter cold, long dark hair whipping around his weathered face as he squinted through the snow flurries at the small frontier town below. The muscles in his arms flexed as he adjusted his grip on the reins. Years of trapping and hunting in these unforgiving mountains having built his frame into something that resembled the grizzlies he sometimes encountered. At 28 years old, he had spent the better part of a decade living alone in a cabin miles from civilization, trading pelts and meat for the few supplies he needed, preferring the company of wilderness to the chaos of people. But even a man who cherished solitude needed flour and ammunition, which was why he found himself in town on this miserable December afternoon. The sky hung low and gray, promising more snow before nightfall, and the few people on the streets hurried between buildings with their heads down and shoulders hunched. Roswell tied his horse outside the general store, his keen eyes scanning the street out of habit, always aware of his surroundings in a way that had kept him alive through countless dangers. That was when he saw her. She stood outside the hotel, a slight figure in a threadbare coat that had seen better days, her arms wrapped around herself in a futile attempt to ward off the cold. Even from a distance, Roswell could see she was shivering, her thin frame trembling like an aspen leaf in autumn. She approached a well-dressed man descending the hotel steps, her voice too quiet for Roswell to hear but her body language speaking volumes. The man waved her away dismissively, not even breaking stride as he walked past her as though she were invisible. Roswell watched as she tried again with a woman in fine furs, then with an older gentleman who at least had the decency to shake his head before hurrying on. Each rejection seemed to make her smaller, her shoulders curling inward, her posture growing more desperate. She was begging for work, he realized. Not money, but work. There was a dignity in that distinction that caught his attention. He should have gone into the store, conducted his business, and returned to his cabin before the storm worsened. He should have reminded himself that he chose solitude for a reason, that other people brought complications he did not need or want. He should have looked away. Instead, he found his boots carrying him across the frozen street toward her. She did not notice him at first, too focused on scanning the street for another potential employer. Up close, he could see that she was younger than he had first thought, probably around 21 or 22, with delicate features that were pinched with cold and hunger. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and her eyes were a remarkable shade of green that reminded him of spring meadows, though they held shadows that spoke of hardship. Her hands, he noticed, were red and chapped, the nails broken from hard labor. "Miss," he said, his voice rough from disuse. He spent so many days without speaking that sometimes his own voice surprised him with its depth. She jumped, turning to face him with wide eyes that held equal parts hope and wariness. "Sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am looking for work, any kind of work. I can cook, clean, mend clothes, tend animals. I learn quickly and I work hard. I do not eat much and I would not be any trouble." The desperation in her voice made something twist in Roswell's chest. He studied her face, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the hollow look of someone who had gone too long without proper meals. Her lips were chapped and slightly blue from the cold, and he could see goosebumps on the pale skin of her throat where her inadequate coat fell open. "How long have you been out here?" he asked. She glanced down at her worn boots, which he now noticed had a hole in one sole. "Since morning," she admitted. I have been asking at every business, every home. But no one needs help, or they say they cannot afford to pay, or they tell me to come back in spring." Her voice broke slightly on the last word. "I cannot wait until spring." Roswell knew he should walk away. He knew that taking in a desperate young woman was asking for trouble, that people would talk, that it would complicate his carefully constructed life of solitude. But the wind chose that moment to gust particularly hard, and she swayed on her feet, her eyes fluttering closed for just a moment as though the effort of standing upright was becoming too much. "What is your name?" he found himself asking. "Lily," she said, looking up at him with those green eyes that held a spark of something that refused to be extinguished despite her circumstances. "Lily Morrison. Lily Morrison," he repeated, testing the name. "I am Roswell Xavier. I live in a cabin about 8 miles from here, up in the mountains. It is not fancy, but it is warm and dry. I need someone to help with cooking and mending and such. The work is hard and the isolation is complete. You would be miles from any other person. But I can offer you a roof, food, and fair pay." He watched her process this information, saw her eyes flicker with the same wariness he had noticed before. She was clearly weighing the danger of going into the mountains with a strange man against the very real threat of freezing or starving in town. It said something about her situation that she was even considering his offer. "I give you my word that you would be safe," he added, his voice gruff. "I am not offering anything beyond work and shelter. You would have your own space and I would respect your privacy. But I will not lie to you about what you would be accepting. It is isolated up there. Some people cannot tolerate that much solitude." Lily was quiet for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face as though trying to read his character in his weathered features. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she straightened her spine and nodded. "I accept your offer, Mr. Xavier, and I thank you for your kindness." "It is not kindness," Roswell said, though even as the words left his mouth, he knew they were not entirely true. "I genuinely need the help. Winter is long in the mountains, and having someone to share the work makes sense." He could see in her expression that she did not quite believe him, but she was wise enough not to argue. "When would you like me to start?" "Now," Roswell said decisively. "Go collect whatever belongings you have. I will get my supplies from the store, and we will head out before the weather worsens." Lily nodded and hurried toward a boarding house at the end of the street, her steps quick despite her obvious exhaustion. Roswell watched her go, then shook his head at his own impulsiveness. He had lived alone for so long that he had forgotten what it meant to be responsible for another person's welfare. But there was no taking back the offer now, and truthfully, he did not want to. Something about her determination, the way she asked for work rather than charity, had struck a chord in him. He completed his purchases quickly, adding extra supplies to account for another mouth to feed. The storekeeper, a portly man named Henderson, raised his eyebrows when Roswell bought fabric and thread, items he had never purchased before, but he had the good sense not to ask questions. Roswell loaded everything onto his horse and was securing the last pack when Lily reappeared. She carried a single small bag that looked like it contained very little. Her entire life, he realized, fit into that one worn carpet bag. The thought made him unreasonably angry at whatever circumstances had brought her to this point. "That is all you have?" he asked, then immediately regretted the question when he saw her flush with embarrassment. "I had to sell most of my things to pay for food and lodging," she said quietly, "but I have what I need." Roswell nodded and untied his horse. "The cabin is 8 miles up the mountain. The trail is rough but manageable. You can ride if you prefer, or we can both walk and spare the horse the extra weight." Lily glanced at the massive bay gelding, then at the steep mountain trail visible at the edge of town. "I can walk," she said firmly. "I am stronger than I look." He believed her. There was steel beneath her delicate appearance, a core of strength that had kept her upright and asking for work even when she was clearly at the end of her endurance. He respected that kind of resilience. They set out as the first fat snowflakes began to fall in earnest. Roswell led the horse, setting a steady pace that ate up the miles without being so fast that Lily could not keep up. He noticed that she never complained, never asked to rest, even though he could see the effort it cost her to maintain the pace. Her breathing grew labored as the trail steepened, and she stumbled occasionally on the uneven ground, but each time she caught herself and continued on without comment. About halfway to the cabin, he called a halt near a small stream. "We will rest here for a few minutes," he said, pulling some dried meat and hardtack from his pack. He handed half to Lily, who took it with obvious gratitude. She ate slowly, savoring each bite in a way that told him she had been going without for some time. He pretended not to notice, instead focusing on watering the horse and scanning the surrounding forest. The snow was falling harder now, beginning to accumulate on the ground and on the branches overhead. They needed to keep moving if they wanted to reach the cabin before dark. "How did you end up in Ogden?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. He was not usually one for conversation, but something about the quiet companionship of the moment loosened his tongue. Lily was quiet for a moment, chewing thoughtfully. "My father died last spring," she finally said. "He was a clerk in a law office in Chicago. When he passed, I discovered he had debts I knew nothing about. They took everything to pay his creditors. I had an aunt in Salt Lake City, so I used the last of my money to travel here, thinking she would help me. But when I arrived, I discovered she had moved to San Francisco the year before. I have been trying to find work ever since, moving from town to town, but there are more people looking for work than there are jobs available." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but Roswell heard the pain beneath the words. She had lost everything, been betrayed by circumstances beyond her control, and yet here she was, still fighting, still moving forward. He found himself admiring her even more. "That is hard," he said simply, because what else could he say? The world was often cruel and unfair, particularly to women alone without family or means. But you have work now, and shelter. You will not have to worry about where your next meal comes from, at least for the winter." "I am very grateful," Lily said, meeting his eyes directly. "You did not have to help me. Most people did not even see me when I asked. But you saw me, and you offered help when you had no reason to. I will work hard for you, Mr. Xavier. You will not regret this decision." Roswell felt something warm unfurl in his chest at her words, a sensation he had not experienced in years. "Call me Roswell," he said gruffly, "and we should keep moving. The snow is getting heavier." They walked the remaining miles in companionable silence, the only sounds the crunch of snow under their boots and the quiet breathing of the horse. The trail grew steeper as they climbed higher into the mountains, winding through dense stands of pine and aspen that stood like sentinels in the gathering gloom. Lily's steps grew slower, her exhaustion finally catching up with her, but she never asked to stop or to ride the horse. Finally, just as the last light was fading from the sky, they rounded a bend and Roswell's cabin came into view. It was not much to look at from the outside, a solid structure of logs chinked with mud and moss, with a stone chimney rising from one end and a small covered porch at the front. But it was weather-tight and well-built, positioned in a natural clearing that received good sun in the summer and was protected from the worst of the winter winds by the surrounding trees. "We are here," Roswell said unnecessarily, leading the horse to a lean-to stable attached to the side of the cabin. He quickly unsaddled the gelding and rubbed him down, giving him feed and fresh water while Lily waited on the porch, swaying slightly with fatigue. When he finished with the horse, he took Lily's bag and led her inside, lighting a lantern to push back the darkness. The cabin was a single large room with a sleeping loft above, simply but solidly furnished. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall with a cooking area to one side. A table with 2 chairs sat in the center of the room, and a comfortable-looking armchair was positioned near the hearth. Shelves lined the walls, holding supplies, books, and various tools. Everything was neat and organized, a place where a man had learned to live alone and make do with what he had. "The loft is where I sleep," Roswell said, gesturing to the ladder that led up to the space above. "You can have it. I will make a bed down here by the fire." "No," Lily protested immediately. "This is your home. I cannot take your bed. I am perfectly fine sleeping down here." Roswell shook his head firmly. "The loft has more privacy. You are a woman alone in a stranger's house. You should have the space where you can feel secure. I insist." They stood there for a moment, locked in a battle of wills until Lily finally nodded. "Thank you," she said softly. "You are very thoughtful." Roswell felt heat rise to his face and turned away quickly to hide his embarrassment. He was not accustomed to gratitude or to being called thoughtful. He busied himself building up the fire, which had burned down to embers in his absence, and soon had a cheerful blaze going that began to chase the chill from the room. "Are you hungry?" he asked, pulling out supplies. "I can make something simple tonight. Beans and salt pork, maybe some biscuits if the sourdough starter has not died." "I can cook," Lily offered, stepping forward. "That is part of what you hired me for, is it not? Let me earn my keep." Roswell hesitated, then nodded and showed her where everything was kept. He watched as she moved around the small cooking area with practiced efficiency, despite her obvious exhaustion. She found the sourdough starter and tested it, pronounced it viable, and set about making biscuits while she put beans and salt pork on to cook. Her movements were economical and sure, the actions of someone who had spent years in a kitchen. While she cooked, Roswell brought in wood to stack by the fire and checked the windows to ensure they were properly sealed against the wind. The snow was falling heavily now, visible through the windows as a white curtain that obscured the forest beyond. They had made it back just in time. Another hour and the trail would have been dangerous to navigate. The smell of cooking food filled the cabin, rich and savory and infinitely comforting after the long, cold day. Roswell found himself watching Lily as she worked, noting the way the firelight caught in her blonde hair, the delicate bones of her wrists as she stirred the pot, the small smile that played around her mouth as she checked the biscuits. She looked more relaxed here than she had in town, as though the warmth and safety of the cabin had allowed some of the tension to drain from her shoulders. "It is ready," she announced, setting plates on the table. She had found his limited supply of dishes and laid out the meal with a care that made it seem almost elegant despite its simplicity. They sat down to eat, and Roswell had to admit that even simple beans and salt pork tasted better when cooked by someone who knew what they were doing. The biscuits were light and fluffy, a miracle given the basic ingredients she had to work with. "This is very good," he said and meant it. Lily smiled, a real smile that lit up her face and made her green eyes sparkle. "Thank you. My mother taught me to cook. She said that any woman worth her salt should be able to make a good meal out of whatever was available. I am glad the skill is useful here." They ate in companionable silence for a while, the crackling of the fire and the howl of the wind outside the only sounds. Roswell found himself acutely aware of her presence across the table, the way she held her fork, the small sounds she made as she ate. It had been so long since he had shared a meal with another person that he had forgotten what it felt like to have company. "Why do you live all the way up here?" Lily asked eventually, her curiosity apparently overcoming her natural reserve. "It seems very isolated." Roswell considered the question, trying to put into words something he had never really examined too closely. "I like the quiet," he said finally. "I like being able to see for miles and not see another soul. I like the rhythm of the seasons up here, the way life is simple and straightforward. Hunt, trap, chop wood, survive the winter. There is a purity to it that you do not find in towns." "Were you always a mountain man?" Lily asked. "No," Roswell said, surprised to find himself willing to talk about his past. "I grew up in Missouri on a farm. My parents wanted me to take over the family land, get married, have children, live the life they had lived. But I could not breathe there. Too many people, too many expectations, too much noise and chaos. When I was 20, I left, headed west, spent some time in various places, and eventually ended up here. I built this cabin 7 years ago and have been here ever since." "You ever get lonely?" Lily asked quietly. Roswell met her eyes across the table, seeing genuine interest there rather than judgment. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I prefer loneliness to the feeling of being surrounded by people and still feeling alone. At least here, the solitude is honest." Lily nodded slowly, as though she understood something in his words that resonated with her own experience. "I think I know what you mean," she said. "I felt that way in Chicago after my father died. I was surrounded by people who had known me my whole life, but none of them really saw me. None of them offered help or even asked if I needed anything. It was like I became invisible the moment my father was gone." The bitterness in her voice was slight but unmistakable, and Roswell felt an unexpected surge of anger at those people who had failed this brave young woman when she needed them most. "Their loss," he said gruffly. "You are clearly a person of value and substance. They were fools not to see it." Lily looked startled by his vehemence, then pleased. "Thank you," she said softly. "That is kind of you to say." They finished the meal and Lily insisted on cleaning up despite Roswell's protests. He could see that she needed to feel useful, to justify her presence. So he let her have her way and instead occupied himself with preparing a sleeping area for himself near the fire. He pulled out extra blankets and furs, making a comfortable pallet that would be warm enough even on the coldest nights. When Lily finished with the dishes, she stood uncertainly in the center of the room, clearly exhausted but seeming unsure what to do next. Roswell took pity on her and gestured to the loft. "You should get some sleep," he said. "You have had a long day and you look like you are about to fall over." Lily nodded gratefully. "I am tired," she admitted. "Thank you again, Roswell, for everything. You saved my life today, whether you want to admit it or not." Before he could respond, she had climbed the ladder to the loft, disappearing into the shadows above. He heard the rustling of blankets, then silence. He stood there for a moment, staring up at the loft, trying to process the strange turn his day had taken. This morning, he had been a solitary man heading to town for supplies. Tonight he had a woman sleeping in his loft. A woman he had known for only a few hours, but who had somehow already begun to change the landscape of his carefully ordered life. He banked the fire and settled onto his pallet, but sleep was long in coming. He lay awake listening to the wind howl around the cabin and the soft sounds of Lily sleeping above him, and wondered what exactly he had gotten himself into. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. Roswell woke before first light, as was his habit, and stoked the fire back to life before dressing quietly. He moved around the cabin as silently as possible, not wanting to wake Lily, but when he glanced up at the loft, He saw her watching him from the edge, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders. "Good morning," she said, her voice still rough with sleep. "What time is it?" "Early," Roswell said. "I am used to rising before dawn, but you should sleep more if you need to. There is no rush." Lily shook her head and climbed down the ladder with surprising grace. "I am used to early mornings, too. My father always said that the early bird catches the worm, and that idle hands were the devil's workshop, and various other sayings designed to get me out of bed at ungodly hours." There was affection in her voice as she spoke of her father, but also pain. She had changed into a different dress, still worn and patched but clean, and had braided her hair back neatly. Even in such simple clothing, there was something about her that caught the eye, a natural grace and beauty that no amount of poverty could entirely obscure. "I will show you around today," Roswell said, pulling out ingredients for breakfast. "Introduce you to the chickens and the goats, show you where everything is kept, explain the routine. If we are going to work together, you need to know how things operate up here." Lily nodded and moved to help him with breakfast. They worked side by side in companionable silence, falling into an easy rhythm that surprised Roswell with its naturalness. She seemed to anticipate what he needed before he asked, handing him things or moving to make space for him without needing direction. It was as though they had been working together for years rather than hours. Over breakfast of porridge and bacon, Roswell explained the daily routine. "The animals need to be fed and watered twice a day, morning and evening. The chickens usually give us 4 or 5 eggs a day at this time of year. The goats need to be milked every morning. Firewood needs to be brought in daily to keep the cabin warm. Water needs to be hauled from the spring, though in winter I usually just melt snow. Cooking, cleaning, mending, the usual household tasks." "What do you do during the day?" Lily asked curiously. "In winter, I check my trap lines every few days. I hunt when we need meat. I chop wood, repair equipment, tan hides. I spend a lot of time just maintaining things and preparing for the next season. It is not exciting work, but it is necessary." "It sounds like a good life," Lily said thoughtfully. "Hard but honest. There is value in that." After breakfast, Roswell bundled Lily into one of his spare coats, which was far too large for her but warmer than her threadbare wrap, and took her outside to show her around the property. The sun was just rising, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold that took the breath away. Lily stopped on the porch, her eyes wide as she took in the view. "It is beautiful," she breathed, and Roswell felt a surge of pride that she appreciated the wild beauty of his mountain home. He showed her the chicken coop, where 6 hens and a rooster clucked and fussed over the grain he scattered for them. He showed her the goat pen, where 2 nanny goats and their yearling offspring bleated a greeting and pushed against the fence for attention. He showed her the smokehouse where he cured meat, the root cellar where he stored vegetables and preserved foods, the workshop where he repaired traps and tools. Lily took it all in with obvious interest, asking intelligent questions and making mental notes of everything he told her. She was not afraid to get her hands dirty, reaching out to pet the goats despite their rough enthusiasm, collecting eggs from the nests without hesitation, even when the hens protested. "You have built a good life here," she said as they walked back toward the cabin, their breath misting in the cold air. "I can see why you love it." "It suits me," Roswell agreed. Then, before he could stop himself, he added, "I hope it will suit you too, at least for a while." Lily smiled up at him, her green eyes warm despite the cold. "I think it will," she said. "I think it already does." The days settled into a routine that felt surprisingly natural considering how recently Lily had arrived. She took over most of the cooking and household tasks, freeing Roswell to focus on the outdoor work that kept them fed and warm. But it was not a rigid division of labor. Roswell often helped with cooking or dishes, and Lily accompanied him on his shorter trips to check nearby trap lines, learning the skills of wilderness survival with the same quick intelligence she brought to everything else. They talked as they worked, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes and fears, the small observations that make up the fabric of daily life. Roswell found himself opening up to her in ways he had never opened up to anyone, sharing thoughts and feelings he had kept locked away for years. And Lily, in turn, revealed herself to be a woman of depth and complexity, her gentle exterior hiding a sharp mind and a wry sense of humor that often caught him off guard and made him laugh. He discovered that she loved to read and had a particular fondness for poetry, which made him dig out the small collection of books he kept on his shelves and offer them to her. She devoured them with obvious pleasure, often reading aloud to him in the evenings as they sat by the fire, her voice giving life to the words on the page. He discovered that she was clever with her hands, able to mend not just clothes but also harnesses and other leather goods, her neat stitches strong and even. She took over the mending he had been neglecting for months and had his entire wardrobe in good repair within a week. He discovered that she hummed while she worked, soft, tuneless melodies that nonetheless made the cabin feel more alive, more like a home than the shelter it had been before. And somewhere in those discoveries, somewhere between showing her how to set a snare and listening to her read poetry by firelight, somewhere between shared meals and companionable silences, Roswell felt something shift in his chest. The awareness of her that had been present from the beginning deepened into something more, something that made his heart beat faster when she smiled at him, something that made him hyper-aware of her presence even when she was just across the room. He tried to ignore it, tried to tell himself that she was his employee, that she was dependent on him for shelter and safety, that acting on his growing feelings would be a betrayal of the trust she had placed in him. But it grew harder to ignore as the weeks passed and winter deepened around them. For her part, Lily seemed content in her role, grateful for the work and the safety he provided. But sometimes he caught her watching him with an expression he could not quite read, something soft and wondering in her green eyes that made him hope that perhaps, just perhaps, she might be feeling something similar to what he felt. Christmas approached, and Roswell found himself wanting to mark the occasion somehow, though he had spent the last several Christmases alone without ceremony. He shot a turkey and Lily roasted it with wild onions and herbs, making a feast out of their simple provisions. He carved her a small wooden box from a piece of pine, sanding it smooth and rubbing it with oil until it glowed. It was not much, but he worked on it in secret in his workshop, wanting to give her something to mark the day. On Christmas morning, he presented it to her somewhat awkwardly, unsure how she would receive such a simple gift. But her face lit up with genuine pleasure as she took it from him, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "It is beautiful," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Roswell. I will treasure it." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a pair of knitted mittens, clearly made from yarn unraveled from something else and reknitted. "I made these for you," she said shyly. "I noticed your old ones were wearing through, and I thought you could use a new pair." Roswell took the mittens, feeling the soft wool, seeing the careful stitches. She had made them for him, had spent hours of her time creating something to keep him warm. The gesture touched him more deeply than he could express. "Thank you," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "They are perfect." They spent Christmas Day in quiet celebration, cooking together and reading aloud and simply enjoying each other's company. As darkness fell and they sat by the fire, Roswell felt a contentment he had not known he was missing, a sense of rightness that came from sharing his life with someone who understood him. "This is the best Christmas I have had in years," Lily said softly, staring into the flames. "Maybe the best ever. Thank you for giving me a place to belong, even if just for a season." "You can stay as long as you want," Roswell said before he could think better of it. "This does not have to be just for the winter. You have a home here for as long as you need one." Lily turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "Do you mean that?" "I do," Roswell said firmly. "You are not just an employee, Lily. You are a friend, maybe more than a friend, and I would like you to stay." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Lily's eyes widened and he saw something flare in them, something that looked like hope mixed with fear. "Roswell," she said softly, "I need to be honest with you. I have been feeling. I have come to care for you, more than I should, perhaps, more than is proper for someone in my position. But I did not want to presume, did not want to make you uncomfortable in your own home." Relief and joy surged through Roswell in equal measure. "You could never make me uncomfortable," he said, moving closer to her. "Lily, from the moment I saw you in town, something about you caught my attention. And every day since then, every moment I have spent with you, has only deepened my feelings. I am not good with words, but I need you to know that you have become essential to me. Not as an employee, but as a woman I have come to admire and care for deeply." Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I was so afraid you saw me only as a charity case, someone you had taken pity on." "I did take pity on you," Roswell admitted, "but that is not why I asked you to stay. I asked because even after knowing you for only minutes, I could see your strength and your dignity. And I have stayed because knowing you has become the best part of my days." He reached out and took her hand, his large calloused palm dwarfing her smaller one. She curled her fingers around his, holding tight. "I am not a wealthy man," Roswell said, needing her to understand the reality of what he was offering. "I live a hard life in a remote place. I cannot offer you fancy dresses or society or any of the things a woman might want. But I can offer you my protection, my respect, and my heart, if you will have them." "I do not want fancy dresses or society," Lily said, her voice firm despite the tears on her cheeks. "I want a life that means something, work that matters, a home where I am valued." "You have given me all of that, Roswell. And if you are offering your heart, then I offer you mine in return, because you have already claimed it without even trying." Roswell felt something break open in his chest, something he had kept locked away for so long that he had forgotten it existed. Joy, pure and uncomplicated, flooded through him. He pulled Lily closer, wrapping his arms around her, and she came willingly, tucking her head under his chin as though she had been made to fit there. They sat like that for a long time, holding each other in the firelight, not speaking because no words were needed. Roswell felt her heartbeat against his chest, steady and strong, and knew that his life had changed irrevocably in this moment. He had lived alone for so long, convinced that solitude was what he wanted, what he needed. But Lily had shown him that there was a difference between being alone and being lonely, and that sharing his life with the right person did not diminish his independence, but rather enhanced it. Eventually, Lily pulled back just enough to look up at him, her green eyes luminous in the firelight. "May I kiss you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. In answer, Roswell cupped her face gently in his large hands, mindful of his strength, and lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was soft and sweet, a tender exploration that spoke of new feelings and careful respect. Her lips were warm and soft under his, and when she sighed against his mouth, he felt it all the way to his soul. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing harder, and Lily's cheeks were flushed with something that had nothing to do with the fire's heat. "We should probably discuss what happens next," Roswell said, though what he really wanted was to keep kissing her until the world fell away entirely. Lily nodded, settling back against his chest, his arms still around her. "I suppose we should be practical," she agreed, though her tone suggested she found the idea as unappealing as he did. "I would like to court you properly," Roswell said. "I know we are living in the same house, which makes traditional courtship difficult, but I want to do this right. I want to give you time to be sure of your feelings, to know that you are choosing this life and me for the right reasons, not just because I offered you shelter when you were desperate." Lily turned in his arms to face him fully. "Roswell, I am already sure," she said seriously. "I know my own heart and mind, but I understand your concern, and I respect your desire to do things properly. So yes, let us court. Let us take the time to know each other even better than we already do. And then, when spring comes and the trails are passable again, if you still feel the same, we can go to town and make this official." "I will still feel the same," Roswell said with absolute certainty. "My feelings are not going to change, but I appreciate your patience." They spent the rest of the winter in a strange but wonderful state of anticipation. They were not yet officially engaged, but they both knew where they were heading. The courtship consisted of small gestures and growing intimacy, stolen kisses when the mood struck, long conversations that lasted deep into the night, and a physical closeness that stopped short of impropriety but spoke volumes about their desire for each other. Roswell found himself working harder than ever, driven by a need to provide for Lily, to show her through his actions what he sometimes struggled to express in words. He brought her wildflowers he found poking through the snow. He made sure she had the warmest spot by the fire. He taught her to shoot, standing behind her with his arms around her as he showed her how to aim the rifle, acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched. Lily, for her part, showed her love through the care she took with everything she did. She learned to cook the wild game he brought home in dozens of different ways, each meal a small act of creativity and devotion. She mended his clothes with increasingly decorative stitches, adding small embellishments that made him smile. She read to him every evening, choosing stories and poems she thought he would enjoy, her voice wrapping around him like a warm blanket. They talked about the future, making plans in the tentative way of people who dare to hope. Roswell admitted that he had sometimes thought about expanding his operations, maybe getting a few more animals, building a larger cabin. Lily confessed that she had always wanted to have a garden, to grow vegetables and flowers and make their little corner of the mountains even more beautiful. "We could do all of that," Roswell said. "If you marry me, we could build whatever life we want together." "When I marry you," Lily corrected gently. "Not if. When." The certainty in her voice made Roswell's heart soar. Winter began to loosen its grip as February turned to March. The days grew longer, the sun stronger. Snow still fell, but it melted faster now, revealing patches of brown earth and the first brave shoots of spring flowers. The animals sensed the change in season, becoming more active, more vocal. And Roswell felt his own restlessness growing, an eagerness to make his intentions toward Lily official and binding. On a bright morning in late March, when the trail to town was finally clear enough for safe passage, Roswell approached Lily as she gathered eggs from the chickens. "I think it is time we went to town," he said without preamble. Lily turned to him, an egg cradled carefully in each hand, her eyes wide. "To town, to make our engagement official," Roswell clarified. "To buy you a proper ring, to speak to the preacher about a wedding." "Unless you have changed your mind." "I have not changed my mind," Lily said quickly, setting down the eggs and moving toward him. "I just thought. I did not know if you would want a formal wedding or if you would prefer something simpler." "I want whatever you want," Roswell said. "But I would like people to know that you are going to be my wife, that you have chosen to stay with me. And I would like to do it properly, with a ring and vows and all the trappings that society expects." Lily smiled, that radiant smile that never failed to make his breath catch. "Then yes, let us go to town. Let us make it official." They made the trip to Ogden 2 days later, the journey taking half the time it had in winter now that the trail was clear and the weather milder. Roswell was acutely aware of Lily riding beside him, her cheeks pink with excitement and the fresh air, her eyes sparkling with happiness. She had put on her best dress, still patched and worn but clean and pressed, and had taken extra care with her hair. To Roswell, she looked more beautiful than any fine lady in silk and jewels. Their first stop was the general store, where Roswell asked Henderson to show them the rings he kept in stock. The selection was limited, but there was one that caught Roswell's eye, a simple gold band with a small garnet set in it, the deep red stone catching the light. "This one," he said, looking to Lily for confirmation. "If you like it." Lily's eyes shone with tears as she nodded. "It is perfect," she whispered. Roswell paid for the ring, along with fabric and thread and other supplies Lily had mentioned needing, and then they walked to the small church at the edge of town. The preacher, a kind-faced man named Reverend Thompson, greeted them warmly and listened as Roswell explained their situation. "We would like to be married," Roswell said, holding Lily's hand tightly in his own. "As soon as it can be arranged." Reverend Thompson smiled. "I remember you, Miss Morrison. You were here last winter, were you not? I am glad to see that you found good fortune." "Better than I dared hope for," Lily said, squeezing Roswell's hand. They made arrangements for the wedding to take place in 2 weeks, giving them time to prepare and for Reverend Thompson to post the banns as was proper. As they left the church, Roswell slipped the ring onto Lily's finger, where it caught the afternoon sunlight and gleamed warmly. "Now it is real," he said softly. "It was always real," Lily replied, "but I am glad to have a symbol of it." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Lily used the fabric Roswell had bought to make herself a new dress for the wedding, working late into the nights to ensure it was finished in time. Roswell spent his days hunting and trapping with renewed vigor, wanting to have extra supplies to trade so that he could afford a small celebration after the ceremony. He also worked on a surprise for Lily, spending every spare moment in his workshop crafting a new piece of furniture. A beautiful chest made from cedar, large enough to hold all her belongings and more, with her initials carved carefully into the lid. It was to be his wedding gift to her, a symbol of his commitment to building a life together. Finally, the day of the wedding arrived. They made the journey to town early, both dressed in their finest. Lily's new dress was a simple design in a soft blue fabric that brought out the green of her eyes, and she had woven wildflowers into her hair. Roswell wore his best shirt and had even trimmed his beard, wanting to look presentable for his bride. The ceremony was small and simple, with only Reverend Thompson, his wife, and a couple of townspeople as witnesses. But as Roswell stood before the altar and took Lily's hands in his, listening to the preacher speak of love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage, he felt the weight and importance of the moment settle over him like a benediction. When it came time for the vows, his voice was steady and clear. "I, Roswell Xavier, take you, Lily Morrison, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, protect you, provide for you, and cherish you all the days of my life. In times of plenty and in times of want, in sickness and in health, I will be by your side. Lily's voice was softer but no less certain as she made her own vows. I, Lily Morrison, take you, Roswell Xavier, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, support you, and stand with you through all of life's joys and sorrows. You gave me work and warmth and love beyond measure when I had nothing, and I will spend the rest of my life showing you what that means to me. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife and told Roswell he could kiss his bride, Roswell cupped Lily's face gently in his hands and kissed her with all the love and tenderness he felt, not caring who was watching. This woman had walked into his life on a frozen winter day and changed everything, thawing the ice around his heart and showing him that love was not a weakness but a strength. The small group shared a simple meal after the ceremony, and then Roswell and Lily began the journey back to their mountain home as the sun began to set. Lily rode in front of Roswell on his horse now, leaning back against his chest, his arms secure around her. Mrs. Roswell Xavier, he thought with wonder and pride. Are you happy? He asked her as they climbed higher into the mountains, the trail familiar beneath the horse's hooves. Happier than I knew it was possible to be, Lily answered, turning her head to look up at him. I spent so long feeling lost and alone, wondering if I would ever find a place where I belonged. And then you appeared, like something out of a story, and gave me not just shelter but a home, not just work but purpose, not just kindness but love. How could I be anything but happy? Roswell tightened his arms around her, overwhelmed by the depth of feeling in her words and in his own heart. I am the one who should be grateful, he said. You took a chance on a rough mountain man who lived alone in the wilderness. You could have chosen safety and society, but you chose this life, chose me. That is a gift beyond price. They reached the cabin as stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Roswell dismounted and then lifted Lily down, holding her for a moment longer than necessary, reluctant to break the contact. Her hands rested on his shoulders, and he could feel the warmth of her through the fabric of his shirt. Welcome home, Mrs. Xavier, he said softly. Lily smiled up at him, her face luminous in the twilight. I have been home since the day I arrived, she said, but it feels even more right now. Roswell carried her over the threshold, a tradition he had heard of but never thought he would observe. Lily laughed in delight, her arms around his neck, and he set her down gently once they were inside. He had built up the fire before they left, and it still burned cheerfully, filling the cabin with warmth and light. I have something for you, Roswell said, suddenly nervous about whether his gift would be enough, whether it would adequately convey his feelings. He brought out the cedar chest from where he had hidden it in the workshop, setting it carefully in front of Lily. Her eyes widened as she took in the smooth wood, the careful craftsmanship, the initials carved into the lid, LMX. Roswell, she breathed, running her hands over the surface. This is exquisite. You made this. I wanted you to have something fine, he said. Something that would last, that you could fill with all the things that matter to you. I know it is not much compared to what fine ladies have, but it is perfect, Lily interrupted, tears streaming down her face. It is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever made for me. I will treasure it always. She stood and wrapped her arms around him, holding him tight, and Roswell held her back, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him, how right it felt to hold her this way. I have something for you too, Lily said after a moment, pulling back with a shy smile. Though it is nothing as grand as this. She went to her carpet bag and pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth. When Roswell unwrapped it, he found a shirt she had made, the fabric sturdy but well made, every stitch perfect. But what caught his attention was the embroidery on the collar, a small design of mountains and trees, executed in thread that matched his eyes. I wanted you to have something that showed where you belong, Lily explained. To the mountains, yes, but also to me. You are my mountain, Roswell. Strong and steady and enduring. I wanted you to know that. Roswell felt his throat tighten with emotion. He was not a man who cried easily, but the thoughtfulness of her gift, the care she had taken, the symbolism she had woven into every stitch, moved him profoundly. "Thank you," he managed to say. "I will wear it with pride." They stood there for a moment, simply looking at each other, the weight of the day and the significance of their commitment hanging in the air between them. Then Lily reached up and began to unbraid her hair, letting it fall in golden waves around her shoulders. "We are married now," she said softly, her eyes meeting his with a directness that made his breath catch. "There is nothing to wait for anymore." Roswell closed the distance between them, cupping her face in his hands and kissing her with a passion he had been carefully restraining for months. She responded eagerly, her arms winding around his neck, her body pressing against his. The kiss deepened, became more urgent, and Roswell felt years of loneliness and isolation burning away in the heat of his desire for this woman who had become his wife. He lifted her easily in his arms and carried her to the loft, climbing the ladder with practiced ease, despite his precious burden. The loft was cozy and private, lit only by the glow from the fire below, and he laid her gently on the bed he had given up for her all those months ago, but which was now theirs to share. What passed between them that night was tender and passionate, a physical expression of the love that had been growing between them since the moment they met. Roswell was careful with her, mindful of his strength, making sure that her first experience of marital intimacy was as gentle and pleasurable as he could make it. And Lily met him with a courage and openness that humbled him, giving herself fully, holding nothing back. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, her head on his chest, his arms around her, listening to the night sounds of the forest outside and the crackling of the fire below. "I love you," Lily whispered into the darkness. "I know I have said it before, but I need you to hear it again." "I love you, Roswell Xavier, with everything I am." "I love you too," Roswell replied, the words coming easier each time he said them. "More than I knew it was possible to love anyone. You are my heart, Lily. You are my home." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed, even if they had not known they were looking for it. The months that followed were the happiest of Roswell's life. He and Lily settled into married life with an ease that suggested they had been made for each other all along. They worked side by side during the day, building the life they had dreamed of during their courtship. They expanded the garden, adding vegetables and herbs, and even a few flowers that Lily tended with loving care. They acquired 2 more goats and another milk cow, building their small farm into something that could truly sustain them. Roswell taught Lily everything he knew about surviving in the mountains: how to read the weather, how to track animals, how to identify edible plants and medicinal herbs. She proved to be an eager and capable student, her quick mind absorbing information and making connections he had never considered. She also taught him things: how to make bread that did not resemble stones, how to darn socks so they actually stayed darned, how to find joy in simple moments rather than always focusing on the next task. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing their thoughts and dreams and fears with an openness that Roswell had never experienced before. They laughed together over silly things, supported each other through difficult moments, and celebrated small victories with enthusiasm. In the evenings, they sat by the fire as they always had, but now Lily often sat in Roswell's lap, her head tucked under his chin, reading aloud or simply enjoying the quiet companionship. Sometimes they did not talk at all, communicating instead through touches and glances, the easy intimacy of two people who knew each other deeply and loved what they knew. Summer brought long days of hard work, but also of beauty. The mountains exploding into green life, wildflowers carpeting the meadows, and wildlife emerging from their winter hiding places. Roswell took Lily on long hikes to his favorite spots, showing her hidden waterfalls and vistas that took the breath away. She rewarded him with gasps of wonder and delight, seeing the beauty he had lived with for years with fresh eyes that made him appreciate it anew. Fall brought the harvest, and they worked together to put up food for the winter, drying meat, canning vegetables, storing root crops in the cellar. It was exhausting work, but doing it together made it feel less like labor and more like an investment in their future. It was in late October that Lily came to Roswell with news that would change their lives forever. He was splitting wood in the yard, his shirt off despite the cool air, his muscles flexing with each powerful swing of the axe. He did not hear her approach, so focused was he on his task, and he nearly dropped the axe when she spoke. "Roswell," she said, her voice containing a note he could not quite identify. "I need to tell you something." He set down the axe immediately and turned to her, concerned by her serious expression. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am fine," Lily said quickly, then smiled. "Better than fine, actually. Roswell, I am with child. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Roswell could not process her words. He stood frozen, staring at her, his mind trying to catch up with what she had just said. Then the meaning penetrated, and a joy so profound it almost hurt flooded through him. "A baby," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Lily said, her smile growing wider as she saw his reaction. "I am about 3 months along, I think. The baby should come in the spring." Roswell closed the distance between them in 2 long strides and swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around while she laughed in delight. He set her down carefully, suddenly worried about being too rough, and cupped her face in his hands. "This is the best news you could have given me," he said fervently. "I did not even know I wanted to be a father until this moment, but now I cannot imagine anything I want more. Well, except you. I want you most of all." "You have me," Lily said softly, "forever and always. And soon we will have a child, a perfect blend of both of us. I am so happy, Roswell, so incredibly happy." They stood there in the yard, holding each other, and Roswell felt his world expanding to include this new life they had created together. He had spent so long living for himself alone, and then Lily had taught him to live for 2. Now they would be 3, and the thought filled him with an emotion too big to name. The winter passed with Roswell being even more protective than usual, insisting that Lily not lift heavy things or work too hard, though she protested that pregnancy was not an illness and she was perfectly capable. They compromised, with Lily agreeing to rest more and Roswell agreeing to stop hovering quite so much, though he never entirely managed the latter. They spent long evenings talking about the baby, making plans, choosing names, imagining what their child might be like. Roswell built a cradle from pine, sanding it smooth and rubbing it with oil until it shone. Lily sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands creating soft things for the baby she had not yet met but already loved fiercely. As Lily's belly grew round with their child, Roswell found himself touching it often, amazed by the life growing inside her. He would rest his large hand on her stomach and feel the baby kick and move, marveling at the miracle of it. "He is strong," Roswell said one evening as a particularly vigorous kick made Lily wince slightly. "Or she," Lily corrected with a smile. "We do not know yet if we are having a son or a daughter." Either way, the baby is strong, Roswell amended. Takes after you, or you, Lily said. You are the strongest person I know, Roswell Xavier. In body, yes, but also in character. Our child will be lucky to have you as a father. The baby came on a warm April afternoon, 2 days after Easter. Roswell had ridden to town the week before to bring back Mrs. Thompson, the preacher's wife who also served as midwife to the scattered families in the area. She had been staying with them for the past few days, waiting for the baby to decide it was time to make an appearance. When Lily's labor began, Roswell felt a fear unlike anything he had experienced in the wilderness. He was a man who could face down a grizzly or survive a blizzard, but the thought of something happening to Lily or the baby terrified him in a way nothing else ever had. Mrs. Thompson shooed him out of the cabin, telling him firmly that this was women's work and he would only be in the way. So he paced in the yard, wearing a path in the grass, starting at every sound from inside the cabin, praying to a God he had not spoken to much in recent years to please keep them both safe. The labor lasted through the afternoon and into the evening, and with each hour that passed, Roswell's anxiety grew. Finally, just as the sun was setting, he heard it, the thin, wavering cry of a newborn baby. His heart stopped, then started again double time as he waited to hear Lily's voice, needing to know she was all right. Mrs. Thompson appeared at the door, her face tired but smiling. You can come in now, Mr. Xavier. You have a son and your wife is doing just fine. Roswell practically ran into the cabin. Lily lay in their bed in the loft, pale and exhausted but smiling, holding a small bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made. He climbed the ladder and went to her side, his eyes fixed on her face. Are you all right? He asked, smoothing her sweat-dampened hair back from her forehead. I am tired, but I am well, Lily assured him. Look, Roswell, look at our son. She pulled back the blanket slightly, and Roswell got his first look at his child. The baby was tiny, red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that were squeezed shut against the light. He was the most beautiful thing Roswell had ever seen. He is perfect, Roswell whispered, afraid to speak too loudly and disturb this moment. Absolutely perfect. Would you like to hold him? Lily asked. Roswell hesitated, suddenly afraid of his own strength and size. I might hurt him. My hands are so rough. You will not hurt him, Lily said with complete confidence. You are his father, Roswell. He needs to know your touch. Carefully, so carefully, Roswell took his son into his arms. The baby weighed almost nothing, fitting easily into his large hands, and when he cradled the child against his chest, the baby made a small sound and turned his face toward him, seeking warmth and comfort. Something broke open in Roswell's chest, a love so overwhelming and instantaneous that it brought tears to his eyes. This was his son, his and Lily's, a perfect, tiny human being who would depend on them for everything, who they would raise and teach and love. Hello, little one, he said softly. Welcome to the world. I am your father, and I promise you that I will do everything in my power to keep you safe and happy and loved. The baby opened his eyes at the sound of Roswell's voice, and though he probably could not focus yet, he seemed to stare right at his father. Roswell felt a connection form in that moment, a bond that he knew would last the rest of his life. What should we name him? Lily asked, watching them with soft eyes. They had discussed names extensively over the winter, but now that the baby was here, Roswell found himself reconsidering all their choices. He wanted a name that would be strong but not harsh, a name that would serve his son well in whatever life he chose. What about William? He suggested. William Xavier, we could call him Will. Lily smiled. William, Will, I like that, it suits him. Mrs. Thompson stayed for 3 more days, making sure both mother and baby were recovering well, teaching Roswell how to help care for the infant. He proved to be surprisingly capable despite his initial nervousness, his large hands gentle as he changed tiny clothes and supported the baby's head when he held him. Once Mrs. Thompson departed, Roswell and Lily settled into their new life as parents. The days were exhausting, filled with feedings and diaper changes and the constant needs of a newborn, but they were also filled with wonder. Every tiny expression, every sound, every new thing Will did was a miracle worthy of celebration. Roswell found himself transformed by fatherhood in ways he had not expected. He had always been protective of Lily, but now that protectiveness extended to include Will, and he felt it with an intensity that sometimes surprised him. He would sit for hours just watching his son sleep, marveling at the tiny fingers and toes, the perfect miniature features, the small chest rising and falling with each breath. As spring turned to summer, Will grew and thrived, developing a personality that seemed to be a perfect blend of his parents. He had Lily's green eyes and sunny disposition, but Roswell's dark hair and, it seemed, his tendency toward quiet observation. He was a happy baby, quick to smile and laugh, content to be held by either parent. Lily proved to be a wonderful mother, patient and nurturing, somehow knowing instinctively what Will needed. But she also made sure that she and Roswell had time together as a couple, not just as parents. Mrs. Thompson had told them that many marriages struggled after a child came, but Roswell and Lily were determined not to let that happen. They still sat together by the fire in the evenings after Will was asleep, talking and reading and simply being together. They still stole kisses in the middle of the day when the mood struck. They still made love, though less frequently than before, and with a new awareness of the sleeping baby nearby. Life settled into a new rhythm, one that included 3 people instead of 2, but that felt just as natural as the old rhythm had. Roswell had expanded the cabin slightly, adding a small room off to the side that served as a nursery, giving them all a bit more space. He had also built a small addition to the goat pen and increased his trap lines, planning for the future when they would need to support not just themselves but their growing family. The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Will took his first steps, spoke his first words, grew from an infant into a sturdy toddler with his father's strength and his mother's quick mind. Roswell taught him about the mountains, taking him on short hikes as soon as he was old enough, showing him the wilderness that was his heritage. Lily taught him his letters and numbers, reading to him every night, fostering a love of learning that matched her own. When Will was 3 years old, Lily told Roswell she was pregnant again. This time, the news was no less wonderful but perhaps less surprising, and Roswell found himself excited rather than anxious. They knew what to expect now, knew that they could handle the challenges of parenthood together. Their daughter was born in February, arriving during a snowstorm that reminded Roswell of the day he had met Lily. She was smaller than Will had been, more delicate, with Lily's blonde hair and a sweetness that had Roswell wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment he held her. They named her Emma, and she completed their family in a way that felt perfect and right. Will was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything, and Roswell and Lily watched with full hearts as their children grew together. More years passed, filled with the joys and challenges of raising a family in the mountains. There were hard times, a winter when game was scarce and they had to carefully ration their supplies, a spring when Emma fell ill with fever and they spent sleepless nights nursing her back to health, a summer when a bear destroyed part of their garden and they had to rebuild. But there were far more good times. Birthdays celebrated with cakes made from precious sugar and candles Lily crafted herself. Christmases spent in the warm glow of the fireplace with small gifts lovingly made by hand. Summer evenings when the whole family would sit on the porch and watch the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Roswell watched his children grow with a pride and love that never diminished. Will grew tall and strong, developing his father's build and his capability in the wilderness. Emma grew into a bright, curious child who asked endless questions and saw beauty in everything around her. They were good children, kind and hardworking, and Roswell knew that was largely due to Lily's influence, her gentle guidance shaping them into people of character and compassion. Through it all, his love for Lily never wavered. If anything, it grew deeper with each passing year, each shared experience, each challenge overcome together. He loved her as his wife, yes, but also as his partner, his best friend, the mother of his children, the person who had transformed his solitary existence into a life rich with meaning and connection. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Roswell took Lily back to the spot where he had first brought her to the cabin, to the clearing where they had paused to rest on that cold winter day so many years ago. The children were with Mrs. Thompson in town for a few days, giving them rare time alone together. "You remember this place?" Roswell asked as they stood looking out over the valley below, the vista spread out before them like a painting. "Of course," Lily said, leaning into his side. "This is where I first began to believe that everything might actually be all right, that you were truly offering me a chance at a new life, not just temporary shelter." "And has it been all right?" Roswell asked, suddenly needing to hear her say it. "Have you been happy here?" "I know this life is hard, that I cannot give you the things other men might be able to provide. Do you ever regret accepting my offer that day in Ogden?" Lily turned to face him fully, reaching up to cup his bearded face in her hands. "Roswell Xavier, listen to me carefully. That day in Ogden, when you approached me and offered me work, you gave me more than just a job or a place to stay. You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me respect when others saw me as invisible. You gave me love when I thought I would never find it. You gave me a home, a family, a life beyond anything I dared to dream. How could I possibly regret any of that?" "You have given me just as much," Roswell said, his voice rough with emotion. "Before you, I was alive, but I was not truly living. I was going through the motions, existing day to day without purpose or joy. You showed me what it means to really live, to love, to be part of something larger than myself. You and the children are everything to me, Lily. You are my whole world. And you are mine," Lily said softly. "My mountain man who saw a desperate woman and chose to help rather than look away. My husband who works so hard to provide for us and protect us. My partner in building this beautiful life. I love you more now than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. That is my promise to you, Roswell, always and forever." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, pouring a decade of love and gratitude and commitment into the kiss. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless, and Lily was smiling that smile that still had the power to make his heart race. They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, looking out over the mountains that had witnessed their journey from strangers to lovers to partners to parents. The sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled its evening song. "We should head back," Lily said eventually, though she made no move to step out of his embrace. "In a minute," Roswell said, tightening his arms around her. "Let me hold you just a little longer." So they stood there as the stars began to emerge overhead, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. a mountain man who had learned that solitude was not the same as peace, and a woman who had discovered that being seen and valued was worth more than all the material wealth in the world. Their story had begun on a frozen winter day in a desperate moment, but it had become something neither of them could have imagined. A love story written in the language of shared work and mutual respect, of quiet companionship and passionate devotion, of two people who had chosen each other every single day and would continue to choose each other for all the days to come. As they finally walked back toward the cabin, hand in hand, the lights from the windows glowing warmly in the darkness, Roswell thought about how far they had come. From a stranger offering work to a desperate woman, to husband and wife, to parents, to partners in every sense of the word. Their life was not easy, but it was good. It was real. It was theirs. And that, Roswell thought as Lily squeezed his hand and smiled up at him with love shining in her green eyes, was more than enough. It was everything. The children grew into young adults who carried their parents' values with them. Will, at 16, was nearly as tall as his father and just as capable in the wilderness, though he had also inherited his mother's love of learning and spent hours poring over any books they could acquire. Emma, at 13, had developed into a confident young woman with her mother's grace and her father's determination, equally comfortable delivering a baby goat or solving complex mathematical problems. Roswell and Lily watched with pride as their children prepared to make their own way in the world, though neither seemed in any hurry to leave the mountain home they loved. Will talked about becoming a guide, using his wilderness skills to help others navigate the mountains safely. Emma spoke of becoming a teacher, wanting to bring education to the scattered families in the region who had limited access to formal schooling. "They will make their own paths," Lily said one evening as she and Roswell sat on the porch, watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before. "But we have given them the foundation they need to build good lives." "We have," Roswell agreed, putting his arm around her shoulders and pulling her close. "You have. You are the one who taught them kindness and compassion and the value of education. I just taught them which plants are poisonous and how to skin a rabbit." Lily laughed and poked him gently in the ribs. "You taught them much more than that, and you know it. You taught them integrity and hard work and the importance of caring for the land. You taught them to be strong but gentle, capable but humble. Those are lessons worth far more than all the book learning in the world." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared. After 20 years of marriage, they had long since run out of words that needed to be said, comfortable instead in the companionship of shared silence. "You ever think about that day?" Lily asked eventually. "The day we met?" "Often," Roswell admitted. "I think about how close I came to just walking past you, to minding my own business and getting my supplies and going home alone. I think about how different my life would be if I had made that choice." "I think about it too," Lily said softly. "I was so desperate, so cold, so afraid. I had been rejected so many times that day that I was beginning to think I might actually freeze to death in that little town. And then you appeared, this massive man with kind eyes, and offered me not just work but dignity. You changed the entire course of my life in that moment, Roswell. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." "You saved me too," Roswell said seriously. "I was not freezing or starving, but I was slowly dying inside from loneliness and isolation. I had convinced myself that I preferred solitude, but really I was just afraid of being hurt, afraid of letting anyone in. You showed me that love was worth the risk, that opening your heart to another person did not make you weaker but stronger." Lily turned to kiss him, a sweet, lingering kiss that still held the spark of passion even after all these years. "We saved each other," she said against his lips, "and we built something beautiful together." As they sat there under the stars, Roswell reflected on the journey they had taken. From that desperate meeting in Ogden to this moment, sitting on the porch of the home they had built together, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had created. It had not always been easy. There had been hard times, lean winters, moments of fear and doubt. But through it all, they had faced each challenge together, supporting each other, loving each other, choosing each other over and over again. The children would eventually leave to make their own lives, as children should. But Roswell knew that he and Lily would continue on together, growing old in this mountain cabin, tending their animals and their garden, watching the seasons change year after year. And when the time came, when their journey together finally ended, they would leave behind a legacy not of wealth or fame but of love lived fully and well. That winter, Will announced that he had been offered a position as a guide for a group that took wealthy Easterners on hunting expeditions in the mountains. It was good money and would allow him to save for his own future. Though Roswell hated to see his son leave, he was proud of the capable young man Will had become. Emma, not to be outdone, declared her intention to start a small school in their cabin during the winter months, when travel was difficult and she would be home anyway. Several families in the surrounding area had already expressed interest in sending their children for lessons. "Our nest is not quite empty yet," Lily said to Roswell as they watched Emma prepare lesson plans with the same careful attention to detail she brought to everything. "But it is beginning to feel different, is it not?" "It is," Roswell agreed. "They are becoming their own people, making their own choices. It is what we raised them to do, but it still feels strange to watch it happening." As spring approached and Will prepared to leave on his first guiding expedition, Roswell took his son on one final long hike into the mountains. They walked for hours in companionable silence, stopping occasionally when Roswell wanted to point out something about the land or the animals. "You have taught me so much," Will said as they stood on a high ridge looking out over the vast expanse of wilderness. "About the mountains, about survival, about being a man of character. I want you to know that I appreciate it, even if I have not always said so." Roswell felt a lump form in his throat. "You do not need to thank me for being your father," he said gruffly. "It has been my greatest honor and privilege, but I will tell you this. Watch out for people who need help, the way your mother needed help when I found her. Do not just walk past suffering because it is easier or more convenient. Sometimes the best things in life come from choosing to care when you could have chosen to look away." Will nodded seriously, understanding the weight of what his father was saying. "I will remember," he promised. The years continued to roll by, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of family life. Will's guiding business thrived, and he eventually married a sweet-natured woman named Sarah who fit into the family as though she had always belonged there. Emma's school grew, with children coming from as far as 20 miles away to benefit from her patient teaching. Roswell and Lily became grandparents, a role they embraced with joy. Will and Sarah had 3 children in quick succession, and Emma eventually married a young carpenter and had 2 children of her own. The cabin that had once housed just Roswell, then Roswell and Lily, then Roswell and Lily and 2 children, now often held 3 generations as the family gathered for holidays and celebrations. Through it all, Roswell and Lily remained the foundation upon which the family was built. They were the ones everyone turned to for advice, for support, for the unconditional love that only parents and grandparents can provide. They hosted Sunday dinners that spilled out onto the porch in good weather, presided over Christmas celebrations that filled the cabin with laughter and warmth, and provided a constant, stable presence in their children's and grandchildren's lives. "We are blessed," Lily said one evening as they sat together watching their grandchildren play in the yard. She was in her 60s now, her blonde hair shot through with silver, her face lined with the marks of a life well lived. But to Roswell, she was still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. "We are," he agreed. His own hair and beard had gone completely gray, and his joints ached sometimes in cold weather, but he was still strong, still capable, still the mountain man who had offered work and warmth to a desperate woman so many years ago. As the sun set on another day, Roswell thought about the legacy they had built, not in terms of wealth or land, though they had enough of both to be comfortable, but in terms of the family they had created, the love they had nurtured, the values they had instilled in the next generation. He thought about that day in Ogden, about the decision to approach a young woman begging for work instead of walking past. It had been such a small choice in the moment, requiring nothing more than a few words and a willingness to see another person's humanity. But that small choice had led to all of this. A love that had sustained them through decades, children who had grown into people of character and capability, grandchildren who would carry their values into the future. "What are you thinking about?" Lily asked, noticing his faraway expression. "About how one small act of compassion can change everything," Roswell said. "About how offering you work that winter day was the best decision I ever made. About how grateful I am that you accepted, that you took a chance on a rough mountain man you did not know." Lily took his weathered hand in hers, their fingers intertwining in a gesture as familiar as breathing. "I took a chance on you, yes, but you took a chance on me too. We chose each other, Roswell, and we have kept choosing each other every day since. That is what makes this beautiful." As darkness fell and the family began to gather inside for dinner, Roswell and Lily stood together on the porch, looking out over the land they had called home for so many years. The mountains rose in silhouette against the darkening sky, eternal and unchanging, witness to their story. "I love you," Roswell said, the words he had spoken thousands of times but which never lost their meaning. "I love you too," Lily replied, her voice warm with the certainty of decades. "Always and forever." They walked inside together, hand in hand, ready to share another meal with the family they had built, the life they had created, the love that had sustained them through it all. And as laughter and conversation filled the cabin, as children played and stories were shared and love flowed freely among them all, Roswell felt a deep and abiding contentment. This was what mattered. Not isolation or independence, not proving you could survive alone, but connection, family. Love that grew and multiplied and spread outward like ripples on a pond. He had given Lily work and warmth and love beyond measure, yes. But she had given him all of that and more in return. They had saved each other that winter day in Ogden. And then they had spent the rest of their lives building something beautiful together, a testament to the power of choosing compassion, of seeing another person's humanity, of opening your heart even when it felt risky. It was a simple story, really. A mountain man saw a woman begging for work in winter. He gave her work and warmth and love beyond measure. And in return, she gave him everything that truly mattered: partnership, family, purpose, and a love that would last until their final days and echo through the generations that came after. And so their story came full circle, ending where it began, with two people choosing each other, choosing love, choosing to build something beautiful together despite all the reasons they might have chosen otherwise. It was not a grand tale of adventure or drama, but something far more precious. The story of a life well lived, a love well earned, and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone.